Today I'm putting together an air-cooled build in this, the Jonsbo D40, so if you want to follow along with this build then stay right here at Kit Guru. So Jonsbo have sent over one of the D40 cases and a HX7280 air cooler for me to use in a build, so that's what we're going to be doing today. This isn't a review as such, but by the end of the build you should have a pretty good idea of what the D40 is like and how the 7280 performs. I'll also give you my thoughts on them both and run some tests, so that way, you know, that's going to help you make an informed decision if you are looking to purchase either of these products for your own build. So let's take a quick look at the key features of the D40 before I cover the rest of the components I'm going to be using. The D40 looks sleek. It's a small form factor ATX case with rounded edges and smooth lines. This gives it a really modern aesthetic, especially with that smooth aluminium front panel. The case features motherboard support for up to ATX boards, a tempered glass side panel with a slight tint, full ATX power supply mounting to the front of the case with a power cord extension to the rear. There is space to mount up to 4 2.5 SSDs, including 2 to the front side of the removable tray. The front I/O is relatively simple, a USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type-C, USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type-A, a headphone microphone jack and a power button, but that is all you get. Moving on to cooling, the D40 can support 2 120 or 2 140mm fans and a radiator to the top of the case, and there's a 120mm fan installation point to the rear. The bottom can also accommodate 2 fans, 120 or 140, and there's a small amount of clearance below the case for ventilation. Both the top and the bottom also feature dust filters to keep our components nice and clean. Getting access to the D40 internals. Here you have to remove 2 rear mounted screws before the top lifts off out the way, and then there are a further 2 screws that hold the tempered glass side panel in place. The back of the case has a gloss finish to it and again is removed in the same way as the front window. Room for cable management to the rear is a little bit tight, but we do have a good number of cable pass-through points so we can work all our cables through where we're going to need them. I will talk more about the D40 as I go along with this build, like I say, giving you my thoughts on aspects of the case. But before we move on to the rest of the components, Jonsbo also sent over a mini version of this case called the D30, so it's the D40's little brother, and I had the choice of which one I wanted to use for this build. This is the MATX version, should you be looking for something that's a little bit more compact with the same features as its bigger brother. So it is worth bearing it in mind if you're after something, you know, a little bit smaller, a nice sleek case but in a smaller package. So let's see what else I'm going to be using for this build. This is my standard test setup and it's a fairly realistic and moderate system that performs well without going overboard. Now, not everything in the PC gaming world has to be over the top in terms of components and full of RGB, and I think what we have here suits that with value and getting the most out of what a moderate budget can offer with performance kept in mind. First, our motherboard is the MSI Z690 Edge Wi-Fi. I think this is a great looking board. It has plenty of features and support for up to 4 NVMe drives, something I'm taking advantage of using a Seagate FireCuda 510 2TB drive for the OS and games. The CPU is the Intel 12700 12-core 20-thread split into 8 P-cores and 4 efficiency cores and a max turbo frequency of 4.9 GHz with a TDP of 65 watts. With the D40 front panel closed off and airflow only coming in from the top of the case, then a low TDP here will help with thermals. Since we have a DDR5 motherboard, I have 32 gigs of Team Group DDR5 Vulcan Black at 5200 to round out the base of the system. The black aesthetic matches with the D40 and there's no RGB on a memory to keep things looking nice and sleek. For our graphics card we have a Zotac RTX 3070 AMP Holo Edition. This adds a touch of colour with the green to purple fade on the shroud and it's still a more than capable card for running games. Sure, it's not a 4090, but in terms of value a 3070 still holds up really well. Personally, over the years I've traditionally gone with the 70 line of cards as they have offered the best value and performance for everyday gamers. On power I have a Be Quiet straight power 850 watt platinum. I'm a big fan of Be Quiet power supplies and it has that lovely silver grille to the top and it's fully modular. So that's important in a case like the D40 where we don't have a traditional power supply shroud to hide the extra cables, so this is perfect for this build. For cooling the system, Jonsbo did send over that HX7280. This is a twin tower air cooler that features 7 6mm heat pipes and comes with 2 140mm fans and a 120mm fan to help keep our CPU nice and cool. TDP is at 280 watts and it comes with thermal grizzly hydronaut paste, so I do have high expectations of this cooler. It's a huge tower coming in at 160mm tall, so it's going to be a snug fit in the D40, but it fits all common socket types as well. Finally, I have a pair of Be Quiet Silent Wings 3 140mm so we can pull in as much fresh air as possible. Right then, so that's all our components covered. I think it's about time we started building in this case. Before our MSI motherboard can go in the D40, we need to add the final few components. Now we've already got the 12700 installed and the Seagate FireCuda 510 NVMe. So that leaves our RAM kit and our air cooler to get ready. So the RAM kit is a low profile version. Now you could potentially get this installed with the air cooler installed, but before the fans. But just to keep life nice and easy, we're going to get this in now. So again, this is the 5200 kit from Team Group with the all black heat spreaders, so no RGB, and I think it does look alright in this board, you know, nice and simple, nice clean effect for it. So our air cooler now, obviously we want the air coming from the front of the motherboard and blowing out the back of the case, and this does fit many socket types, but I have set up the back plate. This is for the 1700 socket, so all metal back plate. If we lift up our board, this just slots in nice and easy. Now it doesn't come with any sticky pads on the back plate to hold it in place, so you do have to keep hold of it till you get it in position. And I've already sorted out all the little bits we're going to need for this, so put our little spacers on, and then it's time for the brackets. So these, just pay attention to which way these face, because obviously they're closer in that way and then further out that way round, so just double check the instructions for your particular socket if you are going to be using this cooler. So got the little thumb screws on here. Now one thing about this air cooler, now traditionally the brackets have the threads in them. This one has got the opposite, so this has got like the male actual screw in it, and then the female thread is on the air cooler itself. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So just make sure these are nice and straight before we tighten them down. Should be somewhere near there. Get our thermal paste on now. Thermal paste, there's loads of videos on how to apply thermal paste, but for this air cooler I'm just going to go with our sort of rice grain sized dollop in the middle, and when we tighten it down it will pull itself and spread itself out nicely. So just a nice big dollop in the middle there, and then we can start getting our air cooler installed. So we are going to go with 2 140mm and the 120mm fans that come with this. So just get this lined up on the pins, and Jonsbo do include a tool for tightening this down as well, along with a few other accessories and splitter cables, but just for ease I'm just using my own screwdriver, and it is just a Phillips head on these. Just go a little bit on each at a time. They're actually quite accessible compared to some other air coolers that are out there. Some are really overcomplicated for what they are, but this so far, the HX7280, I mean it is a big old unit. I'm quite impressed with it. The finish on it is really nice as well. So if you're in the market for an air cooler, I mean obviously we've got to see how this performs later on, but so far so good. The instructions that come with it as well, I've actually got them off to the side here, but the instructions are quite comprehensive as well. So fans, 2 140s and a 120, and I'm thinking 140 at the front, 140 in the middle, and then the 120 at the back. The worst thing about an air cooler are how the fans are attached. Now somebody somewhere must have an idea on a better way of doing these, because these are so fiddly to get right. So obviously when all the fan cables come into the top to all the connectors there, but yeah, somebody must have a better way of mounting these, or an idea at least. I mean, if you're just starting out with PCs and your first cooler's an air cooler rather than an all-in-one or anything, you know, getting these installed is just an absolute nightmare. and I haven't seen anyone do it well yet. So we've got one side of the first 140 on, so we'll get this side on. And with the 140 over the RAM kit, I mean, I suppose you could put the 120 here, and that would give you a little bit more clearance on the RAM kit. But we're going to go this way around. So that's the first one on. Obviously, we need to make sure the fan orientation. But yeah, I mean, sat right on top of our RAM kit there, which is quite a nice little snug fit. So we're happy with that. So our next 140, I'm going to sort into the middle, and this just sits down a little bit lower because it has got that clearance over the socket. So one in there, and then this one. Now, with an air cooler, well, any cooler, obviously, don't forget to remove the protective cover that sits on the bottom. I've seen people do that before, so yeah, we'd already removed this one on this, so we know we're okay there. So that's our second fan installed. So that's gone really easily. Now, I think the 120 is going to be a little bit more difficult because you've got to spread it a little bit further. So obviously you want the fan the correct way around, so it's pulling the air through. We'll sit on that on the back and see how this one goes. So clip into there, that sits nicely. I'm just going to have to pull it that way a bit. Then the final clip, a little bit fiddly, beautiful. So that's all three fans now installed. If we just spin this around so you can see, I mean, it's almost as wide as our motherboard. We are covering up the I/O shield a little bit, so some of the effects there are going to be hidden, but twin towers, nice Jonsbo logo, everything's nice and neat. I'll say it feels really well built as well, so we'll see what it's like in the case. Now, one thing I've just spotted, obviously with this 140 sitting a little bit higher because of a RAM kit, I don't know if we're going to have to maybe swap them because the height of this in the case is really close to the front glass anyway. So we'll get it installed, and if we do have to swap them around, we'll do that. So that is now our motherboard already. So we'll move on to the D40, get this in, and then start getting all our other components installed as well. So now it's time to start working on the D40 itself, and the first thing we're going to have to do is take off the top, take off the back panel, just to give us a little bit more room to work in. So the top, as we said before, you remove the two screws and the panel comes off, and then for the back, we're going to take out the two screws, remove the rear panel. So the D40 is so far so good. Build quality is okay. You don't really get a lot of extras with it, but I will come on to what you do get in a second. So I get this back panel out the way. Over there, so that's out the way. So I said earlier about the cable management space to the rear. Now granted, there is quite a deep channel at the top, and most of our cables, because the PSU is in the front, are basically going to come through and then route straight through to the top of the motherboard for the power there. Pretty much the same with the 24 pin. So where there isn't a lot of room for hiding extra cables, having a modular power supply is going to help with that. So that is the D40 stripped down ready. But before we get to work on that, just go through what accessories you get. So you get a quick start guide, what goes where, and then extra in the bag you also get another dust filter, and this is for the rear of the case. So if you didn't want to use that, you can slap that in there as well, but because we're going to be using it as an exhaust, we're not going to restrict it, so we're going to leave that out. Also in the bag we just get some cable ties, some hard drive screws, but in here as well are obviously the motherboard screws. Now the D40, most cases nowadays, one of the standoffs for the motherboard is like a peg for a locating pin, whereas here they are all screws. So we've got hard drive screws, you can put a 3.5-inch drive in this if you want to, some SSD screws, some more SSD screws, some spare washers for mounting to the bottom of the case if you are putting hard drives in there. We've got a few cable ties, and we've got our motherboard screws as well. So if we move these out of the way, I'm going to start looking at getting our motherboard installed. So let's get these out the bag then. So everything on our motherboard is now ready. I've hooked up the fans as well, so they're all ready to go, save us trying to do it in the case. There isn't a lot of space at the top, obviously, for getting to them. So we've got lots and lots of screws, lots and lots of washers. So we'll get what we think we need. Move these washers out of the way, we're not going to need those for a minute. So right, let's start getting our motherboard in. I think the easiest way for me to do this right now is just to lay it down, just to get it initially installed. So if we lay the case down, all the cables are still out the way using a tie wrap, everything that comes with the case, and we'll start to see if this is going to fit with that 140mm fan on the front of the air cooler. So if we line that up, that's somewhere near. Yeah, okay, so I think we're all okay there. We'll start getting a few screws in. Now looking at that, I think we're going to be okay with that 140mm fan, but only just. So obviously just bear in mind clearance on, if you are using this air cooler but with a different case, then it is something just to keep in mind. So need to get all 9 screws into our motherboard. You do also get an extra couple of standoffs in case you damage one or you need to move things about, so there is extras in there. So yeah, you don't get a lot of extras with this case, but what you do get is basically what you're going to need for a build. This one's going to be a little bit tight around the fan cables, so get that one in. Obviously the MSI board comes with the IO shield pre-installed to the board, so we didn't need to put that in. Now I don't know if you can see on camera there, obviously at the bottom we could add a couple more fans there, but I mean the clearance on the bottom feet isn't too big. But if you wanted to add more fans, then it's maybe something you could do. Now, one thing I've not really talked about so far is water cooling, and yeah, you could water cool this. AIO, be fine. Custom loop, be a slightly different story, I think. I think it'd be a bit of a challenge to get a full loop in here. Now there is a bit of space under the PSU, so yeah, you could put a pump res in there. It's something to think about. And obviously we've got this front panel as well for mounting 2.5 SSDs. And I've got an idea for this. Maybe not for this video, but maybe for one in the future. So that's now the motherboard installed into the case. We can tidy up the cables in a little bit. So I am going to take this front panel out just to make access into the power supply area a little bit easier, and it's really simple. It's just 2 screws at the top, 2 down the side and then 2 on the bottom. So you can mount 2 SSDs to the front of this and 1 to the back, and then at the bottom of the case we have got rubber isolated mounting points for adding a 2.5 or a 3.5 inch drive, and then right at the back of the case there is another mounting slot for another 2.5 inch drive. So get this out of the way. So one of the things I'm thinking with this case, because I'm using NVMe drives, we're not going to need this panel. The front of the case is really nice and smooth with that aluminium. So I'm thinking maybe for some mods, if you had one of these cases, put some cuts in the front panel, give it a little bit of ventilation, maybe 3D print something, a nice little vent pattern, stick that in the front, add some fans to the back of it. And where this sits, I reckon I could 3D print something that would replace this and incorporate a screen. So if that's something you maybe like to see, then let me know. And might be worth doing this build as it is with the air cooled, and then maybe move over something, I don't know, with a 240 AIO, cut out the front panel, add some extra fans, add a screen. So as a base chassis for building a nice little system, the starting to, you know, it wasn't immediately obvious. I wasn't too keen on this case when I first started with it, but the more time I'm spending with it and the ideas are growing, we could do this, we could do that. So that's maybe something to consider. So motherboard's in. I think the next thing to do to make it easier for ourselves, obviously we've got a graphics card to go in. I think we'll put the power supply in next and get all our cables routed, get the stuff around the back as well. But I think it's looking alright so far. So I've now moved the camera in a little bit closer to give you a bit of a better look at the power supply mounting. So before we get a power supply in, we're going to have to just deal with the included cables. So we have got those two USB, the Type C and the Type A. So get rid of this little tie wrap that's in here. And here at the back is the other SSD mount. So things would get a little bit tight in there. So for now, I think we'll just pull these out the back, just keep them out the way while we get a power supply in. Fairly straightforward. So keep those routed around the back. So, be quiet power supply. So this is going to go in next. I've got enough room to deal with the cables afterwards, so we'll get the main unit in first and then come on to putting in the cables that we're going to need. So off the top of my head, we're going to need the 8-pin for the power supply to the motherboard, the 24-pin, and then 2 PCIe for the graphics card, and I think that's about it really. So it's quite a straightforward build, and it's one of the beauties of now having NVMe drives is pretty much, you know, it's becoming the new norm, and the amount of space, the amount of cables that it's saving and using is really great. So, right, so this is the front mounted power supply, so we have to just tuck that extension out of the way. Get this sort of lined up somewhere. Try to do this one-handed really. So get the first screw in, and it shouldn't go anywhere. Again, with that hanging on one screw, just on that bracket there, the build quality on the D40 is really good, to be fair. So get the second one in. Now, it's not going to go anywhere. Get the last two screws in. One, two, three. So once this is in, it's really start to come together. I mean, we'll see how much space we've got for our cable management as well. So roll that round. Nice snug fit on that. Make sure our power supply is flicked to the on position for when we put the top back on. So now you can see it's starting to get a little bit heavy now, but overall it's coming together quite easily. So actually building in the D40 so far, I've not really run into any issues. Now around the back there are a few cable tie points as well, so if we do need to use those in the back, then we do have quite a few, and obviously cutouts. There are no grommets on these. I mean, the edges of the metal are smooth, so you're not really going to run into any problems, but it'd be nice maybe just to have a couple of grommets, maybe this top one and this bottom bit as well. But this case comes in at $99.99 through Overclockers, so again, it's in that section of the market where it's really difficult to recommend this over something else. But again, as we're going on, I say, I'm getting more used to the case, I'm liking the case more. So we'll get our cables in next. So we've got the straight power 11, the 850 watt platinum. And see what we're going to need. So, PCI cable. Get everything out of here. Where's the 24 pin? So we've got a 24 pin, we're going to need that. PCI, so we'll get the 24 pin in first and start getting everything together. So if we move those out of the way, just lay it down a second so you can see inside. And start looking. In fact, I'll spin it all the way over so I can get to these. So plenty of room to access them with that front panel removed. Oh. Then our 24 pin can come straight round the back, and it's pretty much going to go straight back up and through like that. So just looking at that, yeah, I think we do have enough room. I say these are going to get tie wrapped down, so there's enough room here. It's more here if you was going to put any cables. I say a nice big cutout as well on the back for if you wanted to install either an air cooler or a water cooler after the fact. So got the 20 plus the 4 pin lined up. Now the 850 watt, to be quite, the straight powers don't come with custom sleeve cables or anything, so these are the stock black cables, but I say this isn't an over-the-top sort of build, so you could add custom extensions. Obviously, again, just paying attention to how much room we've got to the rear. I think next we'll reposition stuff and then start hooking up the actual board itself with the USB connectors and all the other power connectors that we're going to need. Okay, it's time to start wrapping up this build, and off camera I've sorted out all the wiring to the back of the case and got the back panel back on, and I've also installed the two Be Quiet 140mm fans to the top. So the final part really is to mount our graphics card. Now with this case I did have something laying around that I was hoping to use. One of these, it's the AlphaCool vertical GPU mount, but sadly given the amount of space in this case with the air cooler installed, then that's not going to happen unfortunately, but it'd been really nice to see that graphics card shown off in all its glory. Now I wouldn't advocate putting a GPU really close to the glass, but this uses the PCIe slot, so it does offset it back a bit to give it some airflow. So our final job then is to get this installed, so we'll lay this down once again. And the D40 just comes with the traditional, you know, the slide out of the way cover for the PCIe slots, and then you just remove the two covers on there. So to get the graphics card installed as well, you do have to keep the SSD tray removed, otherwise it's not going to fit. Granted, with a shorter card you would probably get that in there. So we'll get this secured and the cover back onto the front of the case. So this is the final part going into this build, and my thoughts. We're obviously going to give my final thoughts after testing once we see how it performs with that air cooler. But overall, yeah, I'm quite happy with the D40. It surprised me in some ways. Obviously, it does have some flaws with that closed off front panel, but overall, it's a nice, well-built case. It's fairly well thought out. So I'll get our cover back on. But I am really keen to try that with the screen mounted to the front. Now, obviously, it's functional for what it is, this plate, but we'll see what your guys' thoughts are on whether we should do that with this case and mod it that little bit. So I'll quickly get these in. Really simple. So with the cables as well, they will sit behind this. And then we've just got the two PCIe cables for our graphics card to install now, and even with it being open underneath, it is going to look fairly tidy. Just take a little bit of care obviously when you are putting your cables in. So last screw on here, get this panel back in. We might as well put the top on as well. We're going to leave the glass off so we don't get reflections there, so you can see. Now the thumb screws on this aren't captive either, so the same as the side panel, so just keep an eye if you do take them out that you're not going to lose them. Alright, so that's them in, and the last job, a little bit fiddly, is going to be to get PCIe cables installed. So there's one. They're recessed on the Zotac card, so it is a little bit hard to get installed. Okay, I think we're in. So that is our build all done. Now we will show you some close-ups of this as well. So I think it's time we move on to testing now, and then give you my final thoughts on the D40 and the HX7280. Moving on to testing with a default fan curve, we first ran R23 on a 30-minute loop. For the CPU on idle with the glass on, we got a measurement of 33 degrees with a load of 68, and then when we removed the glass, the idle temperature dropped to 31 and the load to 59. Moving on to noise, our idle level was 45 decibels, and then during our 30-minute Cinebench run, this rose to 50 decibels. Finally, for testing our graphics card and see how this performs in the case, running Forza Horizon 5's inbuilt benchmark, on idle with the glass on we were sitting at 34 degrees with a maximum of 70, and then by removing the glass we dropped this down to 31 at idle and 67 on the GPU. Okay, with a little bit of quick testing out of the way, you can see how the D40 and the HX7280 perform. So I'm going to give you my final thoughts on both, and we'll start with the D40. It comes in at 100 quid. Okay, and one of the things I've said time and time again about this section of the ATX, you know, mid-tower sort of section in the market, is it's so congested. If you're anywhere between 80 and 120 quid, there are so many choices. This sits right in the middle at 100 quid. Now, if you're going for the looks, it looks fantastic, this case. Now, it has got that shut-off front panel, so ventilation, it was one of my immediate thoughts when I first saw this. And it's all going to be down to personal choice and personal preference. Do you want something where you're not going to be pushing it hard so airflow isn't as important? But you could spend 5 quid more, you could spend 5 quid less and get something with a mesh front panel, you could get something with included fans. Now the D40 doesn't come with any fans at all as standard. So it will come down to that personal choice and what you want to use for your system. Overall the build quality is great. It has grown on me as I've gone through this video, so yeah. Can I recommend buying it? Again, it's all down to you guys on what you want. So the HX7280, now obviously with the D40 being shut off at the front, we needed something that's going to, you know, perform well, and the HX7280 I think has proved itself as a more than capable cooler. It comes in at around 80 quid, it's quite tall, so 160mm depending on your use case for this cooler. If you are going to put it in a case, just make sure you have got enough room to fit it before you put the side panel on. It's well built, it looks really nice as well, you get those 3 included fans as I say, so yeah, the HX7280 I can thoroughly recommend. What do you guys think? Have you enjoyed this video watching me put this system together? If you have, then do let me know in the comments, and if you do have any questions, then I'll get back to you on them as soon as I can. For today though, I've been Kris for Kit Guru. We'll see you again soon.